Hello and welcome back to my video, which I'd like to call How Long Before Me and My Mad Arms Knock One of These Very Expensive Hard Drives Over. I'm just getting this out of the way right now, that if in the course of this video I end up knocking one of these over by accident, I'm going to leave it in. I'm not even going to cut it out. It's me, the fool, that kicks over one of these drives. So when that happens, do cheer me in the comments or put a link to that in the description for other people to see. But otherwise, let's crack on. Hello, and that's right. Today we're going to be comparing three kinds of hard drive. Right now, if you're looking at some of the larger capacity solutions out there in the market, from Synology, from QNAP and from others, or simply building your own NAS using something like TrueNAS, chances are that when you do set things up first on day one, you want it to last. And one of the things you want to last is your sheer capacity. You overspec. You look at how much data you've got, how much you're going to spec for in the years to come, and you want to make sure you've got enough. Now, all three of the brands here on the table are popular NAS drives. They are used in different NAS systems, some slightly more centered on one brand than others, of course. And in today's video, I'm going to be going through their good points, their bad points, their virtues, what I like, what I don't, and ultimately help you decide, miss them, which one is best for your setup. We will be breaking this down into the following ways: capacity, pricing, hardware specifications, universal selling point, USPs, and noise, because the noise is going to be the amount of noise these make is actually going to be a very big factor once you go to the larger capacities. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. Obviously, everything we talk about is chapterized. If you look in the description and the line bar on the bottom of YouTube, you can skip ahead to what's most important to you. But let me introduce our contestants. Here on my left, presumably your right, but I can't remember how this comes out on the edit, we have the Synology HAT5300. This is their own branded drives. Now, these are actually Toshiba MG06, 07 and 08 drives. Now, I'm not going to talk too much about the hardware specs because we'll touch on those later on, but this is Synology's own range of hard drives. These are drives that are specifically designed for their systems. There's nothing stopping you really utilizing them in NASes from other brands, but it would be very, very foolish for reasons that I'll talk about later on. But this is their own range of drives. Next up, we've got the WD Red series. Now, WD Red series, for the sake of this video, we are talking about the Pro series. Predominantly in this, we're not talking about Plus or Standard. We're not talking about Gold or Ultrastar. We're talking about the WD Red Pro series from Western Digital. Again, they're NAS tailored series of drives for the more enterprise system with 8 or more drives inside. It's been around now for many, many years. They are geared in a much higher gear, both in terms of performance and endurance than traditional WD Red drives, and they're available in large capacities as well. Now, Seagate, again, WD, Seagate, WD, and a battle as old as time itself. They have their own range of professional, large-scale capacity NAS hard drives, the Ironwolf Pro series from Seagate. Again, they have their own universal selling points, their own ticks and dots, which we'll talk about later on, but these three are today's drives of choice. Let's crack straight on capacity. When it comes down to it, if you're already looking at drives like these three, capacity was very much on your buy list. Yes, all three of them are actually available in smaller capacities, but a lot of the time those smaller capacities are there to fill much larger systems with multiple drives at once. Bottom line, when you are already looking at the Pro series, capacity is one of those buying factors for you, whether it's price or not. Now, between the three of them, in terms of available capacities, there is a very clear not first place, and that Synology's there. Synology's drives currently are available in 4 TB, 8 TB, 12 TB, and 16 TB. Now, those are still 4 pretty standard class capacities there. They only recently introduced the 4 TB there, which for me was really surprising. It was one of my early complaints about the series, that they only arrived in 8, 12 and 16 TB, when everyone knows that the sweet spot when it comes to drives in a NAS is generally the 4 to 6 TB mark in terms of price versus the amount of capacity you get for how much people generally generate. But still, there are some big gaps in between there, 1, 2, 6 TB, 14 TB, and of course the bigger capacities as you go higher when you hit towards 18 and 20 TBs that have been recently released by some brands. Who are some brands? Well, of course it's Seagate and WD. They've always kind of been at the front of that, and they have again available all of the capacities from 2 TB to 20 TB in their Pro series for both ranges. Now, I mentioned earlier on that the Synology series there also arrives, I should say, originally as Toshiba MG series. Why is that important? Because Toshiba unveiled recently the MG09 series, I believe. It might have been the 08. And that was an 18 TB drive, and Toshiba's roadmap has already shown that 20 TB drives are arriving any time now, which means I do not give it long before the Enterprise MG drives from Toshiba will arrive with that Synology firmware and the badging there, so Synology's drives arrive in greater capacities. But still, the fact that a lot of the middling capacities in between, which allows buyers to scale the amount of storage that they want to go for and provision their budget against the internal hardware when they're buying a full complete NAS solution, is something that is amiss on this. They've clearly gone for those drive capacities for a reason, but for me they've picked those four. They've gone, we can only have a certain number of SKUs early doors, and they've picked those knowing full well that although the other ones may not be as popular, they still have a following. And when you're looking at Synology solutions in 2022 that arrive, such as the 12-bay DS2422 Plus, and rack mounts that are arriving with 12, 16 and 24, and indeed that 60-bay solution that we've already talked about, the HT6500, not having that range of capacities is a bit of a bummer for some. Yes, those are good capacities, but let's say in terms of capacity, it's an absolute no-brainer that it's a joint first place there for WD and Seagate for their respective Red Pro and Ironwolf Pro series. Next up, let's talk about pricing, because for all of our talk about capacity, most of these drives can be broken down into a price per terabyte kind of deal there. Now, what I mean by price per terabyte is because these drives in their respective versions, right now we're only going to look at the Pro series from the Ironwolf and Red series and the HAT series. We're not looking at the HAS SAS-based drives, just that. When we look at these three drives and their pricing, you generally find that the price per terabyte is pretty consistent regardless of the capacity you're going for. Even the newest releases, despite their newness, generally still follow within about $1 to $2, pounds or euros, the same price per terabyte throughout the capacities. There was a blip a little while ago with Chia that kind of ruined that for a little while, but things seem to have recentered there in the background. Now, in order to calculate the price per terabyte on these three series, what I've done is look at the largest capacity available from each, which is generally still, even by a little margin, the most expensive, and divided that by the number of terabytes that you've got on offer. So we've not looked at the 2 or whatever capacities, we've looked at the 16 TB and the respective 20 TBs of these brands here. And then what we've done is looked at 3 retailers that list these drives in their respective regions. So in terms of the US, I looked at Newegg, and when it came to the HAT5300, it worked out $39 per terabyte. And when it came to the UK, I looked at Scan, and that worked out £38 per terabyte. And with Amazon Germany, I looked at their pricing, and theirs a little higher at 46 euros per terabyte in Germany. Now, how did that calculate across the board with the same retailers? Well, unsurprisingly, these two were markedly cheaper. Not hugely in some cases, but definitely lower in price. And indeed, things got lower in price and therefore better value per terabyte as we move in this direction. I'm sure it's on screen, but just in case it isn't, when it came to the WD Red Pro, it was $26, £31.90 and €38.90 respectively for their individual regions. And there at the lowest price in every single consistent tier was the Seagate Ironwolf Pro at $25.45, £27.20 and €31.45. So in terms of pricing, when it came to per terabyte on those retailers and others that I looked at, including CCL and Box in the UK as well as Amazon in different regions, ultimately it came down to the pricing was the best there on the Seagate Ironwolf Pro, with a marked increase on the Synology drives, perhaps trading on their uniqueness within the NAS industry and within Synology systems, and that kind of proprietary path forward with a lot of higher tier buyers, but still we can't ignore the saving there on the Seagate. Next up, let's talk about the hardware and the performance, because when it comes down to it, and I'm sure you're already aware when you've been looking at spec sheets or my other videos where we've actually delved into the performance of these drives, there's actually very small margins of difference in just terms of performance, or even sustained performance in shorter spans. Plus they've all got their own kind of, we do this, that and the other, this is why our drive is the best for NAS. So before we go down the road of comparing them, I think it's important to highlight, before we get to the hardware, some things they've got in common, just so we can all agree that we have addressed that. First and foremost, all of them have got vibration sensors, temperature sensors, and general cache and RV sensors built into them in one shape or form. They've all got proprietary methods in the same way they've all gone for proprietary compression techniques to fit the data onto the platters. They've all got that on there. So regardless of which one you get, you're going to get a drive that can self-regulate in the more enduring and heavy performing areas of, say, a large rack mount. I mentioned the platters. They all have 9 platters inside. The amount on each platter will differ because of the overall capacity, such as the 20 TB WD red there being 2.2 TB per platter, but still nonetheless at their largest capacity, they're all 9 platters there. They're all using CMR, conventional magnetic recording, or PMR if you want to be old school, and they all have a performance benchmark of around 260 to even as high as 285 megabytes per second. Now they've all reported slightly different, but when we've done our testing, it's been pretty consistent with a margin of error of about 8 to 10 megs difference between them. So to be frank, I'm not going to say any one of these drives is higher performing or give them some sort of massive pat on the back for being 6 megabytes faster in testing. We're not going to do that. They've all got 5 years of warranty, which is good, and they've all effectively got a drive that is based around high performance in an enterprise level environment. They can all be used in smaller NASes, but they'd be a tremendous waste of their talents, and another reason that we'll get on later on at the end of the video. But when we dig a little deeper at some of the more traditional hardware specs, they're all 7200 RPM. In terms of onboard cache, the Synology and the WD have both got 512 megabytes. That's half a gig of cache on board, with the Seagate largest capacity at 256. On top of that, in terms of their workload, the WD and the Seagate Pro series have got a 300 terabytes annual workload rating, whereas the Synology, more enduring, at 550 terabytes workload annually. So again, nearly double the potential enduring workload on the Synology drive per year, which is definitely a tick for me. On top of that, they've all got 600,000 load-unload cycles, so that's power on, power off rated for. That's absolutely fine. But another area of distinction between them is to do with that mean time between failure. A stat I don't really like to harp on about, but some people do still hold it in some kind of credence. And between the three of them, the Synology by a country mile, its mean time between failure of 2.5 million is, unquestionably the highest there, with 1 million rated on the WD Red Pro and 1.2 million rated on that Seagate Ironwolf Pro there. So I think in terms of overall hardware architecture, the Synology HAT5300 country mile again. It's when it comes down to the hardware, you are getting a better drive. And if you looked at the 16 TB of all of these side by side, which is something we're not doing because remember we're looking at each range generally overall, I think it would be argued that that drive there certainly is the better hardware you're getting right now. Next up, let's talk about universal selling points. I mentioned earlier on that I wasn't really going to touch on a lot of the brand rhetoric and slogans. What I'm going to try and focus on is just the things that I think end users will actually take advantage of, things that end users will care about that is unique to each of these drives. If we start with the Synology, the predominant advantage of the Synology drive has always been that if you're using a Synology drive in a Synology system, you're using a drive and its firmware that is being designed to be working with the very systems it's going in. The firmware on other brands, as good as it's going to be in general NAS settings, it will never really be parallel to the software that it's going to be utilized within. It needs to be designed within a multitude of different server systems. Ergo, when it comes to the Synology system working within Synology NASes, the Synology drive in Synology NASes, that firmware can be very, very specific about its hot points and how the system that it's in is going to interact with it. And I mentioned that firmware because not only is it on board, but there are firmware updates, much like firmware updates for Synology, and Seagate and WD drives, but unlike those, you can update the firmware on a Synology hard drive from within the Synology system without powering the system down. Something that you just simply can't do with third-party drives. With these, you will need to disassociate them from the pool. You will need to then use a docking station and update the firmware independently. Or if you're running a private server or a true NAS server, there are ways around that, but still nonetheless, firmware upgrades are much more individual, more time consuming, a lot more hassle than they are on the Synology system, having that all built in. Another universal buying and selling point for this is that when you're looking at the Synology drives, you're clearly buying it for a Synology system, and therefore a lot of retailers will allow you to get better bulk purchasing, whether you're going to be going for something known as deal registration, when a retailer working with a business will contact the brand themselves if you're buying a certain quantity or value of product, give you a little bit of a discount there, or that's typically retailers, if you buy in bulk, will give you a lovely business discount there. Something that I think these drives, because they're being bought with the Synology system, offer in a way that these drives can't to the same degree. Now, what are the downsides? You can't use it with a non-Synology system. I say can't, of course you can. I could slam that inside a QNAP if I wanted to, but it would be pointless. One, it would largely make the warranty pointless. These drives and their support are geared around them being utilized in Synology systems, and if you use them outside of the supported list of ways it can be used, if you hit a fault, it then comes down to you or Synology proving that the fault wasn't caused by the drive in a non-Synology system. And I'm aware they are SATA drives, they are Toshiba drives. We are still talking about standard SATA protocol, but it's going to be still potential hurdles in your support or warranty claim and support ticket. Synology state that support tickets have gone, registered support tickets have gone down with the release of their new drives. And again, how much I want to believe that, there's always going to be the cynic in me that goes, well, of course they're going to be. Synology are telling me that there's been support tickets down on their latest drives that have only been limited compatibility on their most recent releases, and therefore we don't have enough long-term data to compare. But still, nonetheless, Synology felt happy enough to publish this online, so there must be at least some kind of statistical evidence they can point at. Same goes when they were comparing performance of these drives against alternative drives, bearing in mind the architecture of this drive is more enterprise. It's more like an Ultrastar, it's more like an EXOS. The result is that, of course, that performance is going to be very, very high, particularly when we compare against these. But again, that sustained performance that we touched on earlier for me is what really stood out. Now, when it comes to WD Red, I could highlight things like NASware. I'm not going to, because obviously NASware is great, but I've kind of already mentioned that in terms of vibration and system internal monitoring there, which all of these drives have. That's, for me, anymore, it's not enough of a universal selling point. I will talk about OptiNAND, the fact that this drive has a little bit of flash memory on board that is used to store metadata, index data, that sort of thing, to make general access and IOP access improved there in the background, which again, lovely stuff there, do recommend it. And again, if it goes to larger scale deployment, you're going to feel the benefits on that with these drives in a bulk. Again, you do tend to find the WD Red Pro and Standard Red, but although we're not going to touch on that much, appear with a higher reliability on the backblaze. I say that because Toshiba does rank quite well a lot of the time on the backblaze ratings, which I know are still a bit relative, and we'll get to that in a moment, but the Synology drives haven't really featured on there, so I'm not prepared to class the successes of the Toshiba drives as the same as the Synology drives if Synology are making it abundantly clear that this is an improved version of that drive. But I will say for the backblaze stats, even though WD seems to rank quite well on there, they are still relative tests based on the relative quantities they have on their individual servers with their quarter by quarter analysis. So again, that great rating that it seems to have in backblaze for the most part is still incredibly relative to the number of drives that they are utilizing there. On top of that, when it comes to warranty, I will say that although all three of these brands provide warranty, which seems to be a very quick turnaround, in personal experience, the warranty turnaround on WD, from what I've heard when I've worked in e-retail, my own experiences working with clients and customers, the WD warranty and return policy is the fastest. We are still talking the odd day here or there, but generally WD still seem to hold a lot of drives that sit there for warranty replacement, so their RMA service and support and return around seems to be considerably faster than anyone else once you break it down. Now, one thing I will say against them, and we've already touched on this earlier, but I'm going to go into a bit more detail, is they are far less competitive in their pricing. WD Red Pro drives and their pricing, not only are they the most expensive overall, they have the fewest price drops, and the only time you ever see price drops is big key sales events, Black Friday, Boxing Day sales, promotional seasonal events, but only the big ones. Generally, their drives aren't on offer anywhere near as much as all the other drive brands out there, and you find that you may buy a WD Red drive and suddenly something like Black Friday comes along and you realise you could have saved an absolute packet. These deals are a lot more sprinkled out there with a lot of the other brands, particularly Seagate, which moves us there to this end of the table. Their universal selling points that I talked about in the past: one, Ironwolf Health Management, which means that much like SMART, SMART, when you are looking at and monitoring the health of your drives, they've got an additional service with more parameters and more hot points built in, known as the Ironwolf Health Management System, that runs additional checks on the drive in the background, which can be done on a schedule, and monitors the health of the drive over time. This can also be linked to warranty services as well for faster turnarounds and notifications of when your drive is in trouble. On top of that, you've got 3 years of data recovery services. We can go down to the forensic level in the rescue recovery services included with the drive, which should not be sniffed at. We've talked about it many times on the channel. The cost of data recovery services is not cheap. You should never buy a drive based on how much data you're going to put on it or how well it's going to, the capacity of the drive. You should buy the drive and the capacity you're looking at based on how much that data is worth, ultimately how much it's going to cost you if you lose it. And free up to forensic level data recovery services right the way down to mechanical taking the drive apart included cannot be sniffed at, particularly when this is the lowest price drive there on the table. Same goes, there is multiple offers out there that you do see arriving online with lots more promos knocking around even during these times of hardware shortages. Or do we not like? Well, it has the highest power consumption, I find. Typically, obviously when it comes to the enterprise tier and EXOS and stuff, that is debatable. But on top of that, their warranty process, although they have the data recovery services on there and Ironwolf Health Management, I think a lot of users knew Seagate, around 10 to 12 years ago when they were having slightly higher failure rates than other brands out there. And although they've pretty much got rid of those failures and the statistical issues they were going through at that time, a lot of people still associate Seagate drives with those times that have got long memories. Just look up any WD versus Seagate debate on Reddit and you'll see what I mean. Still a great drive now, but those old haunting ghosts of the past have never really left them. Ultimately, between them, we can't really pick one or the other based on their universal selling points because they're quite distinctive between them. But I hope between those three, I've helped you decide which one of those three won the round for you. Right, so next up, and our final part of the comparison is going to be about noise. Now, most people that utilise drives like this may be utilising them in a rack mount system that's already got fans going nuts and cooling systems, and you're not really going to hear them. But that's not always the case. Some of you might be utilising these drives in 4, 6 or even 8 bay desktop systems. The result is that if you are in even relative close proximity to this system, you're going to hear it. You're going to hear these drives more than anything. In most cases, until you surpass an 8 bay system, the drives are noisier than the system by a country mile. Now, as you can see here on screen, we've got the DS420 here. We've removed 3 of the bays and we've installed the drives in these trays. And what I'm going to do is do a heavy benchmark for each of the drives side by side, one by one, and I'm going to show you which one is the noisier of the 3. So the first drive we're going to try is the Synology. We're going to put that Synology in there and that Synology is in bay 2. The WD red is going to be in bay 3. If I can put that in there and see what I'm doing. Finally, in bay 4 is the Seagate Ironwolf Pro. Now, before you highlight it in the comments, I'm well aware that there is a capacity difference between these three drives. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to secure the same drive from the same drive capacity from the three drives, or utilizing the drives I had here in the studio. However, if you do look at the spreadsheets for each of these drives and you look at their reported decibel rating, you will find that they do list very similar decibel ratings on each of their capacity tiers, respective of their own PDFs. So for now, if you can just cut me some slack on the capacity difference between them, you will find that these drives, regardless of the capacity you go for, once you're above around 10 TB, they're very similar in the clicks, hums and whirs to their own respective ranges. So on my screen here on the laptop, I've now got all three drives listed. So the first drive I'm going to do a benchmark on is the Synology drive there in bay 2. Once I begin the benchmark operation, I'm going to stop talking for around 15 seconds so you can hear the drive and its testing there. Also, you're going to see the decibel meter there on screen, which is flicking while I talk. And finally, when you hear that noise, do bear in mind that this is a sustained both read transfer operation and IOPS related transfer. This is an example of peak access, not completely atypical. Normal domestic access is not going to be as high as this, but we have to test a maximum noise scenario. So I'm going to go in and run the test in 3, 2, 1, go. It would help if I put the password in first. I'm going to leave this in. 3, 2, 1, go. And there you go, I stopped the test. So yeah, you see what I mean about how noisy these drives can get? That is pretty atypical. Okay, so now we're going to go for the drive in bay 3. This is going to be some performance there on the WD Red Pro drive. Let's run that test. Get the password in. Bit of relative silence. And begin. So once again, pretty darn noisy, right? Again, very similar in terms of their noise, despite the fact that the Synology there drive is the one that's rated for a higher TB rating there, which again, very impressive indeed. So now we're going to go to that third drive there. This is the Seagate drive there. So we'll get the password put in. A little bit of relative silence. And begin. Now, I can't see the decibel meter there on screen, but it sounded to me like that Seagate drive was by far the noisiest of the three. I'm a little closer to it, of course, but I am closer to it by around 4 centimeters once you really work out the difference there. Ultimately, between the three of them, I don't think there's an enormous noise difference between them. The Seagate drive was certainly the noisiest. I didn't really notice a tremendous difference when I was looking at the difference between the Synology and the WD drive there. And again, even though there was a difference between them and the distance between this phone and that system was, you know, less than an inch each time, but still, right there for me, I think by far the noisiest was the Seagate, and the WD and the Synology there, I'd say pretty much away were largely identical. We are doing a much deeper analysis of sound testing with different kinds of operations very, very soon. But apart from that, let's carry on. So, what do we think? Well, I don't think it goes without saying that the Synology drive is still, in terms of hardware architecture internally, still the best drive of the three here on the table in terms of the design there inside. I do think they're let down a little bit by those capacities they're not offering there, and maybe some of the decisions that the brand has made on some of their newer releases in the 2022 Enterprise and Hyperscale series have kind of, those changes in support and compatibility have tainted people's opinion of these drives in some ways. I don't think we can argue that they're bad drives. I think they are fantastically well designed drives there, and certainly designed for enterprise and high kind of durability use, as well as clearly being made in parallel with Synology systems, can only be a benefit to them. But they're still the most expensive drive here on the table, and till they get some larger capacities out there or more diverse capacities, I still think that kind of competition versus the likes of WD and Seagate is never really going to be final. When it comes to WD and Seagate, however, it has to be said that Synology's value for money and what you get for your money with those additional recovery services can't really be, be ignored, regardless of the capacity you're looking at there or whether you're going pro or non-pro. It's still the best value option here on the table, and for a number of people, when you're reaching that capacity, as well as when you're thinking about the safety of your data in terms of if you have a catastrophic failure, the Seagate is the better option in terms of health management and recovery right now. WD is still the long-standing popular choice of the three, and although it costs a little bit more, it has to be said that they've got a much kind of heavier established historical support in the market, which can't really be ignored. Additionally, unlike the other brands, with Seagate offering their Pro and then EXOs series and Synology only offering this enterprise tier, WD and this Pro series also arrive as WD Gold with other tweaks and improvements, as well as Ultrastar as well. So when you do go for the Pro series, you are getting a Pro series NAS drive, and you've still got options within their portfolio to really change where your money's going. And we touched in other videos how some of the Ultrastar and WD Gold drives cost less than this, but prioritize other areas of enterprise level storage. And between the three of them, they're probably the more long established and more diverse portfolio choice between the three. But this has been comparing the Synology HAT5300 series versus the WD Red Pro series versus the Seagate Ironwolf Pro series. I know it's been a long video, but we really had to touch on these in as many details as we can. And for the sort of money you're going to be spending on this setup for your home or business, surely an extra 10 to 20 minutes of your time will be worth it in the long run. Thank you so much for watching. If you've enjoyed this, chuck me a like. It really helps me understand what I'm doing right and wrong. If you want to learn more as we delve deeper and deeper into this subject of storage as the years go on, do click subscribe. We do a video every day, and there isn't much in data storage that we don't talk about here, myself and Eddie, on NAS Compares. And finally, use the free advice section linked in the description, or link to the NAS Compare article where we go into way more detail about noise and performance on these drives, as well as buy links in the description there, that if you use those to buy the drives for yourself, it won't cost you any extra, and it helps support me and Eddie here on NAS Compares make more and more guides and the free advice for others. But otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.